Hello and welcome to the fourth in our connectivity series sponsored by Volanti Technologies. Our guests today are Fiona Hamilton, VP Europe and Asia for Volanti Technologies, Ganesh Srinivan, Director FS Solutions for Volanti, and Ben Telvinson, the Assistant Treasurer of Global Operations for Corning. We're going to be discussing what makes payment factories effective. Bengt, in your opinion, what are payment factories for? What do they do, in your experience?
To me, it's a centralized way of cost-effectively executing your payment streams, normally attached to shared service centers, where you've got the critical mass of skill and resources. You don't need to have it scattered around your corporation.
Is it much more than that, though?
Yeah, what it comes down to is you clearly need to have the infrastructure around it to actually get the relevant information into the shared service centers. So that's approval of invoices, the whole ERP system infrastructure around it, and the mechanized solution for approvals attached to it. So you got the business knowledge that things are being executed timely, complete, and accurately by a competent group at the cost effective.
Volanti, you have a solution, one of the leading solutions for payment factories. How do you see payment factories? Ganesh, I think you're leading this project.
Yes, Jack. We have been interacting with many customers in this area, and we have helped some of the large corporations implement their payment factories as well. So one of the major challenges with what we are seeing is the multitude of systems, back-end systems, multinational corporations have. Once a corporation becomes global, they have been acquiring companies. The acquired companies have been acquiring different companies. In net result is that in one of the customers we have been interacting, we found that they have more than 100 ERP systems to support at the back end. And there are multiple subsidiaries, regional offices, and the multiple banking relationships. So one of the major challenges we found was in creating an effective payment factory was the integration of all this internal system into the shared services platform. And this is the biggest hurdle most of the corporations are facing. And that's where most of the payment factory projects are also abandoned. So we wanted to address this right earnest and wanted to give easy, flexible solution where you can add the number of internal systems very easily into the shared services platform. At the same time, take care of the multiple banking relationships on the other side, and then come up with very robust routing solution which will orchestrate the entire payment processing and allow complete STP from backend system to the gateways, the payment channels. So end-to-end is that the architecture allows you to achieve the straight-through processing completely without manual intervention. Of course, a little bit of intervention for exception handling. Other than that, it will be a complete straight-through process.
So you're saying that payment factories is much more than just the payments. It's actually the liquidity management as well.
Enabling the liquidity management. So the liquidity management, right now, if you look at, I think Ben will also speak on this, most of the time when you are trying to get a complete picture of the cash within a company, within a large corporation, it is bank statements that are coming in different forms or shapes, and that is taken and then it is put into an Excel sheet, and then treasurer gets to have a full view after at the end of the day, very end of the day, or the next day morning. So at a single given point of time, there is no way a treasurer can see the cash positions within the company. Enable the liquidity management by integrating the liquidity management system into the various inputs and outputs that are coming out of the internal as well as the external bank statement.
Fiona, do you have anything to add to this? Because on the transforming and integrating the multiple messages, that's a major problem.
My kind of take on this is that by having a payment factory in there, and Bengt used the word shared services, actually using that interpretation from a technology point of view, And that is what this is about. And very often this is implemented on a kind of a services-oriented architecture, because all of those subsidiaries and all of the internal treasury management systems, the accounting systems, the funds checking, etc., those are all things which all of those operations need to do. Now, if you implement this functionality at each, if you like, endpoint, then you're reinventing exactly the same wheel. And as we know, things change pretty rapidly in this market, whether it's regulatory, whether it's message standards changing, market infrastructure is changing. If you have to ripple all of those changes through all of your ERP systems, your TMS systems, etc., individually, that's a hell of a lot of repeating the same thing over and over again. And each one of those operations has to do all of their regression testing, etc., etc. Whereas if you centralize that and have those functions as services that can be used by those applications, then you only have to implement the changes in one central area and test it in one central area. So the fact that you've centralized those things not only gives you, if you like, the insulation from change in those originating and receiving systems, but also because you're in the middle of that information flow, and let's face it, that messages represent information, it's the ideal place to actually then leverage that centralized view for things like liquidity management.
And is this the sort of structure you were envisaging when you're thinking about the payment factory?
Yes, overall it is. It depends really how much you expand the answer. To have a successful, centralized payment factory, you need the interfaces from your ERP systems, preferably a standardized ERP solution that feeds the relevant information. You want to maintain only one gateway to the banking system to the degree you can. You want to limit the number of interfaces. You want to keep a very strict standard on what is coming in and what standards are being used in even setting up static data in the ERP system, so that you don't need to manipulate the data once it starts flowing in.
And so if you move to the next slide, we're looking at channel integration management, which is the first stage in bringing the information in from the subsidiaries into the central payment factory. What are the key features of what's needed here, Ganesh?
They're primarily onboarding all these subsidiaries and internal systems onto the shared services. That is the major challenge. And that is mainly because, as Fiona was mentioning, the number of ERPs and the number of formats they have. So how do you effectively and efficiently onboard? That is the major function of the channel integrator. And on top of it, it has the rules, the business rules, based on the rules set up by the Treasury. Some payments will follow certain regional standards and rules. Some payments have to be always made as an urgent payment, or when you have to handle different types of payments. It could be a payroll-related rule, or it could be a rule related to a Euro region. All those business rules that is very specific to the organizations have to be set up. And then, of course, you have to set up the approval process of onboarding itself. Somebody has to see that all the rules have been captured properly, all the validations are set properly. Somebody has to approve it. And then we also include the warehouse function for future payment. And this is again, it could be a payroll, or it could be the accounts payable, which the payments that needs to be paid on a future date, you would like to warehouse it. So we have facility to warehouse those payments as well.
You mentioned the need to set up all these rules and so on. Who makes those decisions?
These rules are made by the Treasury. The Treasurer decides what sort of method of payment that should be used for each of the payments. Whether it has to be sent through SWIFT or SEPA or ACH. What is the ground rule for making any payment? And also the approval process is also determined by the treasury. So whoever sets the rule, that rule has to be approved by some other person so that it follows the organizational process. It is not randomly set up by an operations person.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that this is often where the payment factories fall down. They don't make it beyond this stage. Bengt, what, in your experience, is this a very complicated?
You know, I think what it comes down to is, in a role, you can simplify it, and it's quite a simple jigsaw if you empower the right people to implement it. But I think Ganesh is right when it comes down to the onboarding, but you need to have a predefined set of rules when you start rolling this out, because what you don't want is you don't want to have different rules from different legal entities, etc. And I think in my case, I would always look for what rules do the system infrastructure provide, because you also don't want the rules to deviate from what the systems can control and manage. So you want to, of course, a standard using the system technology that we have. If you start moving outside the systems for the rules, etc., you add complexity that later on will be much more cumbersome to deal with. And it has to be a firm hand guiding the corporation from the starting point to the end point. Because I always said, you know, when it comes down to selection of ERP systems and other solutions, there should only be one option on the menu of the subsidiaries. There shouldn't be two options. There's only one option to pick, and therefore everybody will fall into line. The complexity comes when you give empowerment to people beyond the core project team.
So how do you manage this, help the corporates manage this, Fiona? Because this really is a problem.
The approach that we take is that, you know, we go from the, if you like, the perspective that, largely speaking, a payment is a payment is a payment. You know, how it's represented, you know, by each different ERP system, it's generally speaking going to have the constituent pieces of information that are required to derive a method of payment and derive what needs to happen to that payment and where it needs to go and in which format, etc. And usually we would see, you know, the centralized treasury operations actually them being the ones that say, okay, well, for all of our, you know, sterling payments under what's now £250,000, actually we want those to go via faster payments rather than backs, for example. So those decisions, regardless of whether it's ERP system 1 in this location or ERP system 2 in this location, you can have the centralized rules saying, regardless of where they come from, if it's this currency and it's this particular amount, then it gets routed by this method of payment.
How easy is it to do that, to actually, for bank to make the change, saying the policy's changed, now we want to do this?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you like, the secret recipe that, well, it's not a secret, but the recipe that we use is that regardless of what the source format is, so whether it's, you know, an SAP iDoc or whether it's coming as an EDI type message or anything else from those ERP systems, we translate that into an internal, what's called a canonical model. So it's based on ISO 20022. In fact, it's based on the CGIMP implementation of ISO 20022. So we translate every incoming payment instruction into that model. And thereby, what that enables us to do is to provide functionality which allows people to very easily, without any coding, then say, right, I want that to go out via faster payment. I want that to go out as a Swift NT 101 to my bank. I want it to go out as a NACHA message, etc., because we've already built an awful lot of the maps from our internal model to those industry standard outputs like faster payments and chips and chaps and backs, etc. So it actually allows it to be much more of a configuration rather than coding. And the value of that is that obviously, we're there to maintain those transformations and those end models. So for example, the flexibility is there that, say you want to actually start making some of your FX payments actually via Ripple. Well, we already have that mapping from the model to the Ripple API. So very easily you can just say, one day I want to send MT101s, tomorrow I want to send it via the Ripple API without actually having to do any coding as such.
Okay, now the second stage in the payment factory is the payment processing and orchestration. I love that term orchestration. It means where you're bringing together the channel information that you've got internally with the static information in the internal processing systems to make the final payment via SWIFT or through local clearings, etc. What are the choices that you would like in this particular end of the process, Bengt? What do you need?
I think in overall, what the corporation need is, flexible tools available that do not need hard-coded programming to make it work, right? You want to plug and play, and from the standpoint that you might change as you go along, because when you roll these projects out, you've got a vision and a view up front, and after that you fine-tune it as you go along. Most of the time, very few corporations would get everything right day one, and once you started the project, you take the big bullets and you tackle those, and after that your priorities, the lower level priorities will float up to the top and you start tackling those. But clearly, simple things like getting rid of checks, using more cost-effective mechanisms for the payments, etc., all comes in, and you start looking at statistics. Some legal entities might change their business model. What do we do about that? And that's where the tools for plug and play comes in. So you need the flexibility.
You're placed, Ganesh, isn't it?
Yeah, that is the essence of the value proposition of Volante. It is a plug and play. It is completely modular. You can add any system, you can modify any system, and you can configure rules. As Fiona was explaining, it's all through configuration, not through programming, so that the efforts and the time that is required to make and maintain a change is the minimum using Volante.
Okay, so where would Bengt make his changes? He wants to move out of checks and to say faster payments. What would he have to do within the Volante Volpay hub?
Yes, so it is the analyze and execute stage where you set up the rules. It is going to be all ACH payments instead of checks. So the capture stage, all the messages are coming through the channel integration manager. In the analyze stage is where the payment that is coming in is analyzed, and that is where you decide the method of payment. So now you want to make all your payment using the automated ACH mechanism. So you start analyzing that payment and then format it to that particular method of payment, that is the ACH or faster payment, based on the rules that has been set. And these rules are flexible, so that tomorrow you want to up the threshold for making faster payments or reduce the threshold, you can always go and do it on the fly. You don't even have to stop the system and make the changes. And that is how flexible the system is to make any change in the method of payment you want to make.
So one of the dreams that I heard from a corporate treasurer was that he would like to one day make all his bulk payments through Bank A, the next day, because the pricing has changed, make it through Bank B. Can you do this sort of thing here?
That is where the execution rules come in. So that is where you define the execution rule, which bank has to take the payment based on maybe the funds check. Even you can do it dynamically also. Some of the times you find that, okay, I have to make this payment, but Bank A is not having adequate balance. That is how I have configured all the payments of a particular subsidiary is going through bank A, but suddenly I find that no, this bank A is not having an adequate balance. I would like to switch it to bank B. During the funds check process itself, you can modify your execution flow. That is already defined part of the rules that are set part of the execute. And if you want to do it at the end of the day to change the parameters, yes, that is also possible in the configuration business rules as well. So in essence, what we have done is we have provided a message execution flow, which determines the way in which you want to orchestrate your payment. So either you can do it at the beginning of the project itself, specify based on my fund check, change it, or based on the cost of transaction rules that I have set up, do the payment execution, or at the end of the day, somebody goes and manually sets up the rules that needs to be done. So it's complete flexibility available to the treasury operations team.
And does this give you a new way of looking at payment factories, this sort of flexibility? What is the future of payment factories as we move into 2016? Where is it going, in your opinion?
You know, in my way of thinking, you know, it always is a question of eliminating manual activity, streamlining, having electronic communication, and with electronic communication, we're talking about raising the invoice, sending it through an electronic channel to the customer, having the customer actually applying approval processes that are mechanized and electronic, and letting the flow of information automatically go into the ERP systems and the payment system. Yeah, I mean, I think the model I see here is very much the model I would expect the future to hold, in the way that it is standardizing, it's looking at electronic solution and eliminating manual activity. I think the only piece I would say is it might not always be the treasury function that is actually executing it. The treasury will always be there as the guiding principle on how it should be executed.
Ganesh and Fiona, where do you see the future of payment factories? Because clearly there is enormous flexibility here. Where are you going to take it next?
It is all about bringing efficiency back into an organization, improving the productivity of the IT operations as well as the business management team who are involved in the treasury management.
One of the other things that might happen, which may mirror the changes we're seeing at the banking end of the corporate to bank space, is that, you know, a couple of years ago, when you mentioned kind of like putting all of this functionality outside the walls of the bank in a cloud environment, people were going, no, can't do that. These are payments, it's too important, too confidential, etc., etc. And a couple of years later, you know, we are very definitely seeing a trend where the banks are saying, actually, an awful lot of our functionality when it comes to corporate onboarding, we do want to push out into the cloud. So, you know, I think, you know, the cost pressures and some of the flexibility of having a lot of this functionality actually hosted in the cloud, you know, whether it's a private cloud or a community cloud, I think that I see is somewhere where it's likely to go.
Thank you. Bengt, do you have a final comment?
The controls, the security arrangements, you know, ensuring that nothing can be tampered with, etc., is building up all the time. At the same time, the threat is building up. So, and I think that will be one of the aspects that will be very important for anybody that is going to be successful in this arena, that they can maintain a lead in that environment. You know?
Well, thank you all very much. Very interesting. And the future looks bright for payments.